A lot of influential, beloved horror franchises came out of the early days of the slasher film era in the 70s and 80s. Friday the 13th, Halloween, and A Nightmare on Elm Street are the big ones. However, all too often overlooked is the 1983 horror film Sleepaway Camp. Even though it has a solid cult following, a rabid fanbase in places like sleepawaycampmovies.com, 3 sequels, and a recovered sequel, it still isn't as well known as it should be. If you want to talk about it in the mainstream, more people know about the ending than the film it comes from. That's not to say the film's defined simply by its ending, it's just that it's one of the most shocking endings in horror history, and that moment tends to stick with people. If you haven't seen this movie, I insist you watch it before watching this. The ending of the movie goes down in horror history, and I can't talk about the movie without it. Writer, director, producer Robert Hiltzik came up with the idea for the movie while at film school. At the time, horror movies were the most commercial venture, something that still holds true today. They were the cheapest to make and the easiest to sell. The movie wasn't made as a ripoff of Friday the 13th. Hiltzik wrote the script when he was 23. He used to go to camp when he was young and thought it would be the perfect location for a horror film. He went with the summer camp location because it was the one place that provided a lot of variety. The cabins, the woods, the lake, the rec center, and so on. It saved them from having to go to multiple locations. The campground was Camp Algonquin in Argyle, New York, located on the east side of Summit Lake. Hiltzik knew the owners of the camp and proposed the idea to let them film in the off-season. Since the camp was closed in the fall and winter, they were happy to be able to make some money during that time and allowed them to film. Hiltzik came up with the idea for the beginning and the end of the movie, and now that he had the location, he filled in the middle. Hiltzik gathered roughly $50,000 to produce the film. His mother died in a tragic accident, and after he received $300,000 in insurance money, he used that to produce the film. He dedicated the movie in her honor. With the script written, the budget in place, and the location locked, he began gathering the cast and crew. Around that time, horror films were full of 20-somethings playing teenagers. Hiltzik wanted to cast the film with actual teens to make it that much more realistic. The casting session for the actors was unusual. For casting the character of Ricky, he had the actors yell a string of obscenities.
I'll kick your freaking asses over this goddamn camp, you fucks!
Take it easy.
Buddy, those bricks will kill him!
Take it easy already.
For Angela, he had the actresses stare wide-eyed ahead, silently eating a candy bar. 17-year-old Jonathan Tiersten was cast as Ricky, and 13-year-old Felissa Rose was cast as Angela. There were 2 actresses up for the role of Judy. Hiltzik originally intended the character to be blonde, as the opposite of Angela, but Karen Field's audition was so good, he hired her instead of the other girl, Jane Krakowski. Almost the entire crew had just finished working on Creepshow and moved over to work on this. Filming began in September of 1982 and went for 6 weeks. They shot a lot of the footage in the woods early because they knew it would start to become obvious it was fall and not summer the longer they waited. Still, some shots were done late, and they had to spray paint the leaves and grass green to cover up all the brown. Although some things they couldn't hide, like all the fall trees in the opening. Since the film was relatively low budget, they had to cut corners where they could. Many of the extras running off the buses in the beginning were relatives of Felissa Rose. The cast brought most of their own clothes for the wardrobe. The locals were excited about having a movie filmed in their town, and they helped out where they could. They let them borrow the ambulance and the police car, as well as a police uniform. The paramedics earlier in the film were really the local paramedics. The cast said that working on the film was actually like being at camp. There were summer romances, they all ate in groups at the cafeteria, and with very little adult supervision, it was kind of like a big party. When they weren't filming, the cast stayed at the local motor court. Young Peter was played by Maximo Sorrentino, who popped up last year in The Sorrentinos with his brother Mike, better known as The Situation, from the Jersey Shore. Ben the Cook was played by Robert Earl Jones, James Earl Jones' father. Listening to that voice, you can tell right away.
They're too young to even understand what's on your mind.
At the time, slasher films had mostly synth scores, so to stand out, Hiltzik went with a full orchestral score. Hiltzik's girlfriend at the time, Missy, was one of the producers. In the scene where Leslie gets dumped in the water, the actress got sick, so they had to shoot the rest of her scenes with Missy. So you see one girl fall in the water, and then a different one climb onto the dock. Hiltzik and Missy got married after they made the film. When Kenny flipped the canoe, he accidentally sliced his hand open and had to be rushed to the hospital. When Judy was in the rec hall, there were 2 different sets of guys sitting next to her. I think they were hoping that no one would notice. The practical effects were done by Ed French, and they still look good today. For Artie's severe burn sequence, they had him propped up on a fake floor. Underneath, they had air tubes that were pumping liquid gelatin into the blisters, causing them to pulsate and pop. They did a life cast of John Dunn, so they could do the sequence with the snake crawling out of his mouth, and show part of his face has been eaten. For the hive scene, they made a dummy, and covered the face in a sugar mixture to draw the bees to it. For Mel's death, they had an arrowhead spring-loaded to his back that popped up when the first part hit his throat to make it look like it went through. Mike Hellen, who played Mel, was sick when they were filming, but did his best to hide it from everyone. He died of lung cancer a few months before the film hit theaters. Felicia's mom didn't want Angela to actually do any of the killings, so they put it in her contract. Whenever you see the hands killing someone, it's actually the hands of Ricky, Jonathan Tiersten. When Angela comes up in the canoe to kill Kenny, it's really Tiersten in a wig. In the original script, Mel kills Ricky because he thinks that he's the killer. While filming, Hiltzik changed his mind and let the character live. Frank the cop filmed his scenes and left to work on another project. They needed him back to shoot some night scenes, but he had already shaved his mustache for the other role. He didn't have time to grow a new one, so they gave him this awful fake stick-on one that Hiltzik still regrets. Hiltzik tried to make it clear that all the people that Angela killed deserved it in some way. Artie for trying to molest her, and Kenny for teasing her, for example. He regretted having her butcher the kids in the sleeping bags, because really all they did was throw sand on her. I think that just made her seem all the more ruthless. For the big end scene, originally they were going to have Rose stand there with a prosthetic penis. As they sculpted the penis, they realized that this was a horrible idea. They did a face cast of Rose, and made a mask that Ed French described as a potato chip thin mask, made of dental acrylic, tinted pink and translucent, with glass eyes. They paid a local college kid a few $100 to shave his body hair and stand naked for the wide shot. The kid was nervous and had a few beers to work up the courage. In the moments leading up to the scene, you can see the guy disrobing in the distance. Hiltzik didn't want the ending to go out, so most of the cast didn't know about it. The actor who was in the scene at the end of the film has never come out publicly. The film wrapped in October. Because of the nature of the film, Hiltzik thought they would get an X, but was ecstatic when they got an R. The movie opened on November 18th, 1983. Back then, movies didn't open nationwide across the country in thousands of theaters. They would usually only open in a few markets, and then gradually go across the country. That said, it opened in 85 theaters in New York versus Barbra Streisand's Yentl and Amityville 3D. It beat both of them and was #1 at the box office with almost $500,000. Felissa brought her 8th grade classmates to see the film on opening weekend. A few years after the film was released, the camp closed down and was demolished to build condos. The development was canceled, so some of the locations are still there, like the tennis court and the baseball diamond. Even though the film was a hit, Hiltzik still had trouble getting another film off the ground. He wrote screenplays for parts 2 and 3, and licensed them out to Michael A. Simpson. Rose auditioned for the role of Angela, but it became clear that Simpson was set on giving the role to Pamela Springsteen. He altered the scripts and made 2 and 3 more black comedy. Hiltzik wasn't happy and disowned the films. Hiltzik quit the industry and moved on to a normal life with his wife and kids. In the early 2000s, the webmaster of SleepawayCampMovies.com had been in contact with many of the cast. They were able to get in touch with Hiltzik, and after talking to Fangoria magazine, they put together the first Sleepaway Camp reunion. There was some controversy when the film came out on DVD. A few of the scenes had been cut from the Anchor Bay release. The part with the kids going skinny dipping, the hacked up kids in the sleeping bags, and the scene with the snake crawling out of Kenny's mouth was shortened. Anchor Bay swore they had nothing to do with that and just released the print that they were given. Thankfully though, the scenes were all restored in Scream Factory's recent release. The film looks better than ever with the cleaned up print. Although maybe a little too cleaned up, because now you can see Tiersten in a wig standing in the doorway before Angela killed Judy. Although it has led to some interesting fan theories that both Angela and Ricky were killing the kids who were mean to her. After discovering that Sleepaway Camp was still finding its audience after all these years, Hiltzik came out of retirement to produce and direct Return to Sleepaway Camp. This to him was the direct sequel to the original. There was a Sleepaway Camp 4 that was filmed in 1992, but production was halted when the studio went bankrupt. There was about 34 minutes shot, and it was included as a 4th disc in the Best Buy Sleepaway Camp DVD box set. Years later, the webmaster of SleepawayCampFilms.com took the footage and, along with scenes from the previous 3 films, put together sort of a Frankenfilm. It was released in 2012, and while most moviegoers see the film as garbage, Sleepaway Camp fans like it for being able to see the lost movie. A true rarity that wouldn't exist if not for the passion of a few loyal fans. Sleepaway Camp is a great horror film. It goes to show what can be made when someone pushes their creativity and follows their dream. The cast all speak fondly of their time working on the film, and remember the good times they had. Hiltzik often jokes about the Crying Game ripping him off, and there's a lot of people in the horror community who think they did just that. Hiltzik's also been talking about a remake for years. If he writes and directs the film, I'm curious. If anybody else does it, I doubt it'll be little more than a watered-down rehash, although I could see them trying to be clever and make the killer a boy who's really a girl. There's a reason why this little film from a first-time director, and a cast of unknowns at the time, still lives on. It's smart, it's funny, it's memorable, and has one of the best endings in cinematic history. I'd like to see today's milquetoast horror by committee films come close to this sort of longevity. Most of them are forgotten on the walk from the theater to your car.
All right, ladies, let's hurry it up and unpack so we can get these trunks the hell out of here. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the name is Meg. M-E-G.
Hey everyone, I just want to remind you, I have a Patreon set up. If you like the show and would like to help keep me going, even $1 a month would make a difference. I would really appreciate it. I've got some cool rewards set up, so check it out. Thanks a lot.